Hello and welcome to Read. Today I want to talk about Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. This is Williams's first novel. I use air quotes because his actual first novel, Nothing But the Night, which was released 12 years prior to Butcher's Crossing, it seems like not even John Williams really liked it and didn't kind of consider it part of his core body of work. So in respect for his vision of his oeuvre, we're going to consider Butcher's Crossing his first book, which came out in 1960. Then we've got Stoner, and then finally Augustus. And even though this was his first book, I think it's very fair to say that Stoner is his most popular novel, and it is definitely making a sort of revival through the book suffix, bookstagram, booktalk, booktube, and so on. And so Stoner was definitely my introduction to John Williams. I read it and I did make a video of it. However, as I was learning more about his works, it seemed like everybody who was talking about Butcher's Crossing was holding it up as high, if not higher, than Stoner, and kind of reminded me, it's kind of funny, this happens sometimes in the music world as well, where you have an album that everybody knows, like Coltrane's Love Supreme, but then when you hear people who are actual like fans of Coltrane, they're like, oh, you got to check out Ascension, that's like probably better than a Love Supreme. And so it's just funny to see that happens as well. So I will say that I went into this book with pretty high expectations, and I was interested enough in the theme, sort of late 1800s America, and from here I'm going to say that there's stuff that I really liked in the novel. I think it's a tightly written book, and I think that John Williams does a really, really great job in describing the nature and the natural environment. I think that for the most part, the character motivations are all really solid and consistent. However, the criticisms that I have for the book have to do with holistic, like general arc and composition of the story. And so from here, I would say it's safe to assume that there will be spoilers. Just a quick elevator pitch that I'll be kind of extracting from the blurb, which is already an extract, is that the story is about a young man named Will Andrews who, firstly, I've got a bone to pick with you, John Williams. You need to stop naming your main character's first name your last name, because I swear to God, I'm going to open up Augustus and the guy's name is going to be William Augustus. But anyway, we've got Will Andrews, who was attending Harvard. He was in his third year. However, he was very persuaded by the writings of Emerson, and so he goes out to kind of discover nature and discover his true self in nature, and that takes him to Kansas, to a small town called Butcher's Crossing, where he meets a man named Miller who is an old hunter, and he's got this vision. He's telling this tale about this great herd that he spotted many years ago, that he has to now go out and hunt, and so he assembles a crew and so on. If that sounds interesting to you, please do go and read it. It's, like I said, it's a well-written book, but starting from here, assuming spoilers, if it's not already obvious from what I was saying, then it'll probably be obvious from the fact that a Herman Melville quote is used as an epigraph, not from Moby Dick, but from The Confidence Man. This book is so much just Moby Dick that the parallels really started to get to the point where they were obvious to the point of not being satisfying anymore. So we've got our main virginal character of Andrews / Ishmael, who meets the kind of eccentric captain or leader with a vision, Miller Ahab, and we've even got the parallels of the first mates. So we've got Starbuck, who is Schneider in this book, who starts off being very devoted, but then because of the insanity of the crew leader starts to second guess and starts to fight back and is brewing discontent. And then we've got Stubb, or Charlie Hoagie, which also, just want to say, I only realized this like just before starting to record, but I wonder if John Williams was making a kind of pun at Stubb and the fact that Charlie Hoagie had lost a hand due to frostbite. I think just John Williams being cheeky. And you know, Stubb is the less educated but more devout one, and so yeah, it's the problem that I felt with this book is that it was very formulaic. It had a lot of hero's journey stuff that ended up coming back when they went through the return, they go through their trial. Of course, nature conquers them and they come back with nothing, just like in Moby Dick. And when they come back to town, we find out that the problem is that society had moved on without them. When they got stuck out there, it turned out that all of the work they did was in vain. People don't want buffalo skins anymore, and so it kind of drives everybody crazy. Charlie Hoagie still has some PTSD from the whole experience. Miller is just going crazy because he doesn't want to acknowledge that he'd sort of conquered. He'd found this thing, but the world moved on without him. And Schneider dies in another, oh my god, I don't know if this is just like me reading too much into it, but there's a river that they need to cross, and we all know from Greek mythology that the name of the river that carries you to the afterlife is the river Styx, and Schneider gets killed by a stick, by a long log that just stabs into him, or stabs into the horse, and then the horse kicks him. But I was just like, okay. And then, the book ends with Andrews kind of leaving his kind of damsel in distress goddess to go out and find himself again. It's also not great in Stoner. In this book, the female characters are just completely pure archetypes. 100% of the female characters in this book are prostitutes, and I will kind of get to that when I start to get into my maybe slightly like, this is how I kind of sort of wish the book was written section. But yeah, what I would say is that, just jumping back before I get before I spend a little bit too much time in the negatives, I still think that, again, the dialogue, like I said, is all very logical and it feels very authentic. And yeah, I really felt that the whole journey of them going out to this valley to find this buffalo herd, getting snowed in, it all made sense, but it was, again, very, very formulaic, where you have sort of almost just like plot points hitting the hero's journey. We have Will Andrews's first encounter with Francine, where he's meeting the goddess, and the goddess is going to give him the gift of, manhood by like bringing him into masculinity by giving him the honor of her having sex with him free of charge. How generous. And of course he refuses because he's still a baby boy, and then he runs away, and then when he comes back he just becomes a kind of ravenous, debaucherous man. Well, not really debaucherous, but they just start having sex in earnest when he comes back. All of that was just, it's a tricky thing. It's a complicated thing because, on the one hand, something that Brandon Sanderson said, which I kind of resonate with, is an important thing to bear in mind if you are trying to be a sort of critic, is that the more you read, the more you value novelty above and newness above everything else. And so you will sometimes criticize a well-known story that was done well because it was something new. And that was something that was basically the experience of reading Butcher's Crossing. I was just like, there's nothing wrong with it, but I feel like I can just, like a heartbeat, like a conversation, I can just tell exactly what's going to happen. Like, of course they're going to get snowed in. Of course they're going to get trapped. Of course somebody's not going to make it back. Of course this dangerous river is going to have some repercussions. Of course society is going to have moved on without them. Like, they're not coming back as heroes. It was just not ever going to happen. And so that was a sort of conflict because it wasn't even necessarily that the book, it wasn't that it didn't have forward momentum. That was something that I kind of felt with William Gaddis's A Frolic of His Own, where it was kind of the opposite. Like, I didn't have any idea what was going to happen in A Frolic of His Own. I was just along for the ride because of how much I love Gaddis's work. In this book, I just knew what was going to happen, so I was like, all right, just walking in the kind of established story arc footsteps that you can see so clearly. Another thing, the symbolism maybe gets a little bit too on the nose. Something I pointed out in a post on Instagram is that Will Andrews gets baptized 4 times in this book. So in the, leaning into the how to read literature like a professor, the fact that when a character has a bath or gets washed or something, it's not just a bath, it's a baptism. So the first one is when Will Andrews arrives in Butcher's Crossing for the first time and he just kind of cleans himself. The second one, which is really awesome and brutal, is when he's trying to gut the buffalo for them to eat, and like buffalo blood. He gets bathed in buffalo blood, basically, and he needs to go down to the river to wash himself. The third time is when he climbs in, he like swims in the Death River, and it's like again another thing. I'll get back to this, but he's playing around with Schneider and they're playing as though they're kids, and it's like, come on. But then the last baptism happens again when he comes back and he washes himself off for the final time. And so again, it's like symbolism that once you start reading literature in a certain way is probably it's still satisfying, but just because you can see it, it was a bit on the nose for me. And another thing that I was not necessarily happy with was that by the time they get back to the town and they meet MacDonald, who had originally organized to give them money for the buffalo hides, he's kind of become destitute and he's given up on life because that was his whole business. But now he's noticed that it's gone out of fashion and he doesn't have any money anymore. The way in which the information of how the world has changed is described to them comes very much in a monologue that felt really, really out of place. And not felt out of place, but it just felt like it broached just objective narration as opposed to just a character authentically talking about it. That was just my experience. I do feel like I would have loved a maybe more subtle or more developed way in which they could have really, really shown that the world moved on without them, without just having kind of Butcher's Crossing be abandoned. And another thing that I think, and this kind of again gets into the point of how I would say female characters, but it's just the female character is treated in this book, is that it almost would have been a kind of great subversion of the hero's journey if Francine had left him, because he didn't have the kind of prize of the woman to come back to kind of celebrate the journey. It almost would have really, really leaned into the themes if even that kind of booty was denied him. And however, no, instead, like, she did stay back. She was the faithful woman in his quest to become the hero, the Jesus figure. He cured her of her prostitution, and she became devout, and it's implied like that she waited for him. All in all, it's funny. Now I'm just trying to think. I'm just sitting and I'm like, well, okay, how am I going to sum it up? How am I going to describe my overall feelings? I don't regret reading the book because so much of it is just them going on their journey, and that part is all written fine. Again, if you don't mind the fact that it is quite formulaic, it's fine and it's very satisfying. And I think that even though it doesn't have the like crystalline prose of Stoner, where every sentence just seems like it's just perfectly written to describe the moment, whether or not you agree with the moment. I know that there's definitely some valid criticisms again for the female characters and that representation in Stoner, but nevertheless I think the way the prose of the book is just kind of perfect for telling that story. The prose in Butcher's Crossing is different. Again, it's much more descriptive, leans a lot more into describing nature, and I really liked a lot of the scenes where in their kind of first walking, trying to get to the valley where the buffaloes are, going through the desert and kind of having those, like, come on, going through the desert, this is just, I'm getting Bible flashbacks. But then even on the way back as well, just this sort of sense of disorientation. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. It's good. It's done well, but it's not going to rank up as one of the sort of high, really, really impactful novels that I've read. But I am really, really curious because I would like to know what you think about the novel and why some people hold this up as high as stoner. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know, and it's probably a controversial video considering my opinions on Butcher's Crossing, but let me know what you thought and what your opinion of the novel was. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.